interest that is quite unique. And so we have to also do some search in terms of which universities are available, where they are available, and of course the cost at which the studies may be available. But we do have a number of persons who generally come forward for what I call the traditional areas of study. So the response may not be very specific that I just gave, but it shows that there is quite a lot of opportunities that are available locally and internationally as well.
And I'm assuming that as some of the areas that's the offerings would certainly fall in line with government's is pillars of development. Is that I'm assuming very often there are those areas plus those that is requested that persons may have their own personal interests.
Yes, Cadore. In fact, we do have what we call a national priority needs listing. And that national priority needs listing is based on the background of the national economic needs of the country. You would be aware that there is a National Sustainable Development Plan 2035 that has its pillars for implementation of the plan. And one of the pillars focuses on that of ensuring that there is an educated workforce. And that educated workforce is guided by what the economy would be requiring based on the economic projections of the country. We also have the support of the National Training Agency, which also would indicate based on training needs and employers' needs, also make recommendations in terms of what the market is asking for and what we are looking at. In fact, we also have what we call the National Labor Market Survey. And the National Labor Market Survey would also give a very clear indication as to what the labor market is requiring based on the projections, whether it's strength in hospitality or in construction or in marine, as very well be the case. And so we compile what we refer to as the national priority needs. Earlier this year, we would have appointed what is referred to as a National Scholarship Awards Steering Committee. And that advisory committee is supposed to be able to gather all of these recommendations and to finally produce to Cabinet a recommended list of national priorities. And we try to ensure that when we offer scholarships, they are within the national priority needs. We do have situations where we have quite a large volume of persons who require scholarships in particular areas. So we see quite a lot of business management, business administration, accounts, finance. Quite a lot of persons apply for these areas. And it would mean that if we provide opportunities solely in these areas, that we are going to be in a very saturated state where we have a number of business persons, accounting persons, and they may not be able to find sustainable jobs as they would require. So we are guided by what the market is asking. I can tell you based on where we are, that there is quite a significant need for our health services. And I'm talking about all areas of the health sector. And there is also specific needs for specialization as well in terms of the health sector, because there are some services that are required within the hospital services and the health sector that we do need to have some level of specialization, as you would know and appreciate. And so we also would operate on the advice of the Ministry of Health in terms of what is required in terms of specialization. There have been a number of doctors who would have gone on to Cuba, for example, one of the countries that supports this specialization quite significantly. And these doctors have gone on to specialize in various areas. There are a number of needs in terms of marine. We also noticed that the emerging sectors, we had a very, very keen interest in the areas of hospitality, recognizing that the economic landscape suggests that based on the construction industry, and we noted that there's going to be a lot of construction of hotels and so forth, and therefore the hotel sector is one area that is in need of having some persons who are so qualified to serve. Of course, the issues of climate change, biodiversity, etc., also comes to the fore, and a number of persons have received scholarships to further their studies, to advance their studies in things like biology, environmental studies, even here at SGU, that supports the marine biology, etc. And we also recognize the need for the psychological and social support And there is a need for areas of specialization in terms of psychology and being able to address some of the mental challenges that our people are going through, especially our young people. So these are some broad areas that we recognize are in desperate need based on what the economical landscape is looking like. But there are some unique areas. In fact, we just only about 3 weeks ago, we would have had a ceremony where we would have awarded students who would have been traveling to excel or to advance themselves in welding and fabrication, for example, a very untraditional area for a master's degree. And we just had a student who would have traveled off to pursue studies in welding and fabrication. And there are other areas under TVET education that we have also seen some persons now going off to advance the architecture, the architectural design, the areas that focus on engineering, etc. So there are some areas that are unique. And there are some areas that what I call the traditional areas where even if we have trained persons, we still need to ensure that we continue to train persons. We need to look specifically at the healthcare services, our doctors, our nurses, those lab technicians, etc. Areas that are critical for our health sector to grow. So we do have a priority list, and we are working to ensure that we can fulfill the requirements of the national needs.
I mean, no doubt that all of that activity taking place, it keeps the ministry quite busy. So let's get to there is opportunities. The question then begs as to how does one qualify for those opportunities? Take me through the process.
Well, let me take you through the process. Now, sometimes we have requests from friendly governments or organizations for provision of scholarships. And there are some countries where we have standard application calls. And for example, we have China, that's a standard application call. We have Cuba, that's a standard application.
No, I was more referring to what happens locally. So you've received that.
Yeah,
we did intimate that.
I'm going to take you through. Yes, I'm going to take you through that entire process. But I was just starting with the call for applications first.
Okay.
And so there are some standard calls for applications. We have SGU as well, which is standard call for application, which is deadline of July 15th as well as November 15th. So when the calls for applications are received and it goes out to the general public, sometimes there are tight timelines between receipt of the call and the actual deadline for the submission of application. And sometimes based on the standard calls, there is what I call sufficient time for application because general public is aware that the SGU call is November 15th, and that's a standard. Now, once applications are received, we need to ensure that the applicants have what for the areas in which they are applying. And there are some standard information that is required for the application process to be complete. Some countries would have more specific requirements, but generally, the applicants need to complete the correct application form. They need to submit certified copies of their qualifications, whether it's at CXC or SGU or whatever levels. We need to have transcripts provided, and we also need to use SGU as my example. November the 15th is deadline for SGU. We expect to receive all the applications by that date. Generally, there's quite a lot of applications received for all of the scholarship awards, and therefore a National Scholarship Selection Committee is so appointed by Cabinet to go through the process of shortlisting, interviewing, and finally selecting the successful candidates that are going to be awarded these scholarship awards. The National Scholarship Award Selection Committee is responsible for shortlisting the applicants and ensuring that the applicants have what is required by the application call, and in most instances, having a standard GPA of 3.0, and that is across the board for it to be considered at the next level, which is the interview level. Persons will then be interviewed, and the interview is basically going to ascertain the person's position, the current economic position that they are in, so that we are able to make an assessment of who best qualifies. Of course, you would imagine, Cadore, that there are hundreds of applications, and sometimes we only have to select 10 or 15 applicants. For example, we have 15 applicants for China. We normally receive over 40 or 50 applicants. So it's a very difficult and tedious process. And sometimes persons believe, I'm saying insane belief that they have not been treated fairly because they believe that they have what it takes. But I want to assure you that the committee is very transparent. There's a very transparent process, and we want to ensure the general public that persons are selected based on set criteria. And what you would have to meet those criteria to be accepted. Of course, there might be some level of flexibility based on the number of applicants that has been received. And if we are undersubscribed, then considerations will be given to make some level of flexibility based on the number of persons who applied and the prerequisite qualification they may possess for consideration. But the committee has a very important task, and I can assure you that the task has been effectively carried out, and the ministry tried to ensure that we do our due checks and balances to ensure that we treat our candidates or applicants quite fairly in terms of the selection of the applicants for awards.
Do you sort of get the sense that the queries, the concerns that are raised, it is merely out of the fact that people do not understand the process in its entirety? They're thinking, I'm the only person that's applying, when in fact there is a large volume, a large pool to pull from.
You're right. I mean, sometimes there's a perception that, I apply, so why not? I've applied twice, I've applied 3 times, so I should be considered. But what the facts are is that there are a number of competitive applications, and I'm going to use my SGU call as probably a very typical example.
Right.
Having a GPA of 3.0 is probably the first criteria that an applicant needs to have. And in our last call, we have had excellent applicants. In fact, most of our applicants are 3.2 and above.
Okay.
And so you find that the competition here for selection is quite steep. And even if you may have what you believe is the prerequisite academic entry qualification, there are still so many people who have as much as, or in some instances, way better than. But people believe that because they have the prerequisite and they've applied 3 times, that there is something wrong with the system. But I can assure you that the system is quite bulletproof. Of course, there are going to be instances where we're going to have debates, but I can assure you that there is due diligence always when it comes to the selection of candidates for scholarship.
Do you offer feedback to individuals who maybe, after repeated attempts, they probably feel as though they've been cheated? And I'm assuming there's going to be that. But do you offer feedback to them so that maybe they can work on their offerings for when another opportunity comes around?
Yeah, in fact, we do provide some feedback to persons, whether or not it's adequate. I can say probably we have a little bit of work to do there to improve that kind of customer service to ensure that adequate feedback is always given. But there are a number of candidates and I will give you an example. A candidate may apply with a GPA of 3.2 and may apply for SGU, for example, was unsuccessful. And we would say to the candidates, well, there were other candidates who probably were at 3.6, 3.7, 3.8, or 4.0 for that matter. And then we would suggest to applicants that you endure that semester and that you try to improve the grades so that you can reapply. And when you reapply, you would now have a better chance of being selected because your performance has so increased. And we have a number of persons who would have done that and were eventually successful. And so we try to support these persons to improve so that they can, be able to be successful. Of course, there are applicants who may have applied once or twice, may have not done additional academic certification or qualification. But based on the new pool of applicants, they may have come from a rank of 70 to now a rank of 15 or a rank of 10 because the new pool of applicants may not be as strong as the previous pool. So there are variations in terms of the selection, but we do try.
Process is normally influenced by political activists and others that have their own internal interests.
Cadore, before I came into the ministry, I would have engaged in entire sentiments as you just did express, that they have applied, that they believe that because they are of a different political opinion to the minister or any other political figure within the system, that they are disadvantaged. It was only after I actually joined the ministry that I recognized that this is far from the truth. In fact, I can assure you that the minister in my ministry does not know who is selected until I present the cabinet submission with the recommendations from the committee. And I would often say to minister, this is a recommendation as provided by the committee. I cannot recall any instance since I've been engaged with the scholarship committee where cabinet has so gone against the recommendations of the committee to indicate that this particular candidate should be given favor or should not have been granted favor. I believe that the perception of the general public sometimes is quite skewed by what people would say in the public sphere without having evidence to support the claims that they are making. And to be quite frank, the process is very transparent. I can assure you that if any candidate believes that they have been aggrieved, we now have what we refer to as our national scholarship policy. And the national scholarship policy has a procedure that seeks to address persons who believe that they have been aggrieved. And there is a grievance process that persons can now go through. Okay. And it starts with first filing a complaint to the permanent secretary, who is going to gather all the evidence based on the claims that are made against the scholarship committee. And the National Advisory Committee, which was so appointed by Cabinet, which is a very wide cross-section stakeholder committee. In fact, that committee has 21 different stakeholders engaged, and it's very wide. And so whenever a person would file an appeal, this committee would have the responsibility of reviewing the appeal as so filed by the candidate. So we have since implemented this, and Cabinet has endorsed this process. And I believe if there is anyone, Cadore, who you may have come into contact with who believes that they have been aggrieved, you can let them know that they now can have an appeal to that particular process. So I think that having these systems in place are very important, and it helps to take away the political perception that some people may have and believe that because they are not of a particular cloth, that they are not considered. But we believe that we do all that we can, very transparent, to ensure that we select who is worthy of election.
I tell you, sometimes you may seldom argue, even if you put Jesus Christ as part of the panel, somebody may probably still argue. That's just part of human nature. Are you at liberty though, to disclose who the committee members are?
Right. Our National Scholarship Awards Selection Committee is headed by Sister Anne David Antwine, who have served the committee since its establishment many years ago, in fact, over 10 years ago. And I believe that she has given human service to the committee, and that committee has been working under her stewardship and leadership for a number of years and encompass other stalwarts through education. Brother Victor Ashby as one of our members. We also have Sister Marshall. We have new members as well added. We have persons like Mr. George Phillip. We have some doctors who have also been appointed, because quite a number of the applications that come forward are persons who are pursuing medical degrees. And so we have since added Dr. Donald as part of the committee as well. We have retired teachers and principals we have education officers who have been retired, who are very, accustomed to the field of academia. And so we have persons who have a wide array of knowledge in terms of academics. And so it's a 9-member committee, and this committee has been working tirelessly to ensure that the candidates are, well deserved in terms of their selection. So we have Sister Bola, who is a retired education officer, who is part of the committee as well. And I can tell you that the committee is quite experienced and versed in terms of the areas of academia. And so we are very confident that we have selected a very responsible and mature committee for that matter.
29 minutes gone past the hour in the morning time. My guest this morning, Permanent Secretary from within the Ministry of Education, Norman Gilbert. We'll take a quick commercial break. When we come back, though, we'll entertain your questions via the different platforms. The number in studio is 435-2041. There is a caller that's on the line. I am seeing you. I'm probably just going to take you before I go so that I don't lose you. Good morning, caller. You're live.
Good morning.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning to you and to your followers and to the Permanent Secretary. I didn't quite get his name. A couple of things quickly.
Norman Gilbert.
Mr. Norman Gilbert. The face looked familiar. I thought I was somebody I knew. Yes. A couple of things. I heard you mention a number of things that would have happened a couple of weeks ago. That's in the past. I don't know if some of them actually did happen. I trust that they did. But a couple of things I wanted to bring out. Now, the matter of the awards committee, I think that was, before it was a very haphazard way, and I think it was under the NDC, but you said about 10 years ago, that the need was felt to have a proper, screening committee. And I agree that the cabinet should have some say in terms of ratifying the committee. But I believe when things are selected or appointed by politicians, I get very skeptical. I would rather see that there are certain disciplines. Just like how you have standard calls, there should be standard disciplines that should be represented on the committee. And once those disciplines are there, somebody who probably is chairing the committee, they submit the names to be ratified by cabinet. I agree cabinet should be involved, but I'm not comfortable with cabinet naming the committee, and that's different from what I'm trying to suggest here. So if you have medicine, you said is important. If we're thinking about the technical field, that we want to go more into skills training should be represented. So there should be some standard disciplines that should be represented on the committee.
Okay.
And once you have done that, then you come up with a list of names, you submit it to cabinet ratifies. I'm not sure that's what happens now. You can explain or agree if that is the case when you finish.
Okay.
Secondly, I'm hearing about the standard calls, and that bothers me because we're hearing a lot of talk about changing the emphasis of education. I am not hearing that the government policy is having an active role in determining what scholarships we seek and accept. I'm hearing people offering us scholarships and we're accepting them. I would like to hear from you, how does government policy in terms of what they think the country needs for the next 15, 20 years, how does that policy guide our approach to those who give us scholarships and those to whom we approach for scholarships? It's always better to ask for what you want than to just say yes or no to what you're being offered. So I'd like you to answer those two questions, please.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
P.S. That's the two questions being posed at you. We'll take a quick commercial break. That should give you enough time to gather your thoughts because we were planning to take a break anyway. We must take a break. Take a quick break, and we'll be right back right here on To The Point.
Vaccine safety is always a top priority. Like other vaccines, the COVID-19 vaccines being developed have been through the same trial phases and rigorous process required for all vaccines. Global efforts on the development of the vaccines are built on existing research from previous coronaviruses like MERS and SARS-1. As COVID-19 vaccines are approved for their broad use in the population, be reassured that they will continue to be monitored to identify any adverse events. Your safety is our top priority. Vaccines bring us closer. Choose to get vaccinated.
Thank you. Welcome back to The Point for today, the 15th day of December. My guest this morning, P.S. Norman Gilbert from the Ministry of Education. P.S. Before the break, there were two questions that were thrown at you. Your response, please.
Yes, I want to start with the second question that the caller would have raised in terms of the acceptance of scholarship awards that are merely provided, and that maybe he is alluding to the fact of there is a lack of a national policy or plan that guides the selection of scholarship. Now, I don't know if the caller would have probably missed what I would have mentioned, that Cabinet would have endorsed a national scholarship policy. And I can also make the policy available if the caller would so like to have a view. Now, the national scholarship policy sets out a number of issues that relate to scholarship, which includes the selection process, which includes the scholarship areas and the process for deciding the national priorities. It includes areas of bonding and bond service. It includes issues that surrounds the financial obligations of the applicants. It also includes the obligations of the donors and how we address our donor community. And it also includes what we refer to as our national volunteer system that we expect awardees to be able to contribute towards their country by so volunteering. Now, in the determination of the national priorities and the selection of scholarships, I would have indicated earlier that Cabinet also appointed a national advisory body, which is responsible for overseeing of the entire scholarship process, but also guiding Cabinet as well in terms of the areas that we should be focusing on in terms of available scholarship. And I did say that this committee is a very wide committee. I was just trying to pull while we were speaking the composition of the committee, because this committee has approximately 21 different stakeholder groupings, very wide, and has expertise from varying fields. In fact, that committee comprises of persons in education, in TVET, in medicine, in business, in law, in commerce, a number of areas. And so with the wide cross-section of this committee, we expect that the recommendations coming forward from this committee would be very vast, and so government would be in a good position to make a final determination based on the recommendations of this committee. So I want to assure the caller that we have done what we believe is necessary. What I believe we can do better at, and I want to agree with the caller on that, is in terms of the call. When I said the call for applicants, and I know that he referenced the call for applicants, I was only speaking about the timelines or deadlines for receipt of applications. So I said that there are standard calls. It does not mean that there are standard areas where there are going to be available scholarships. There are standard call times or application times during the course of the year that we accept applications. But the caller might be right in the sense that we need to have consistent review of the scholarship that are made available from our friendly governments and organizations to ensure that they match with our national priority needs. So I support the caller on that in terms of constant revision of what is available and what is offered, and ensuring that it's also matched and there is synergy between what the national needs are and what is being offered by our friendly government. So we do need to have more consistency in terms of that. But there is processes to ensure that there is a national process by which we would come up with our priority list. And we need to just ensure that we match what is offered by what is within our national priorities.
22 minutes on to the hour. Caller, you alive?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Cadore. Greetings.
Good morning to you, sir.
Listen, miss, just a matter of grammatical pedantry because I can't do anything else. As the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education of this here country, Mr. whatever is his name, disappoints me once more. Sir, when you tell me that a group of students, quote unquote, would have gone off to Cuba, my question to you is, why hadn't they gone? When you tell me that before joining the ministry, you would have consulted with certain people and so on, why hadn't you consulted with them, sir? In effect, you have abused about 7 times incorrectly using would have plus the past participle, seemingly to think that you're telling us what happened. No, sir. You need to define your position as it relates to your communication skills so that you do not continue to insult the intelligence of some of us, albeit old people now, who have learned English language properly, sir. You serve in the Ministry of Education. Bah, humbug, you ought to do better than that, sir. Have a nice day, will you?
Thank you very much, caller. We're keeping our eyes on the clock. 21 minutes on to the hour in the morning time. And in case you probably just joined us, my guest this morning is Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Education, Norman Gilbert. Norman, there's a lot that we can talk about as we look at the opportunities. You mentioned healthcare, and certainly I'd probably want to, if we could focus on that, because very often while you hear there's opportunities for doctors to go off to study, but there's some of the more technical areas, for specialized areas. We find very often you've heard cases where these specializations, they have to be brought in from outside. What sort of emphasis, and it goes back to the question that a previous caller they asked, in terms of government ensuring while there are scholarship opportunities, but that they are specific to our developmental needs, especially for health.
Yeah, I think when we consider the area of healthcare, there are quite a number of shortcomings that has been identified that we need to explore more in terms of training and specialization. We just recently would have had 2 doctors who went off to Cuba for specialization. And those areas that they have gone off to specialize in are areas that we recognize are critical to our health sector. There are still some areas in terms of radiology, oncology, that we still need to ensure that we can fill to make sure that our health sector is adequately poised to address the health concerns of our citizens. So there is a need for us to look at offering greater opportunities for specialization.
Right.
We have a number of doctors who express interest, but again, exploration in terms of conversation with friendly governments is critical, and we need to still expand. Cuba has been probably our mainstay in terms of the healthcare specialization for doctors. We still need to look at other areas where we can have more opportunities available for doctors who are looking to specialize. But there is a need for us to focus. We've trained lab technicians, for example, which is an area that we have had a very low percentage of persons who actually go off to study in this area. And there have been a few persons who have been trained in that area to support the medical laboratory at the hospital. So we do identify that there are some areas that we need to focus on. We have been in discussions and conversations with our friendly governments, the Ministry of Health, to ensure that we can have negotiation for more areas. But the fact is that there is always a need, and the need continues to be great in that area. SGU have started our nursing program. We have had a number of persons who would have gone into SGU to commence the BSc in nursing. And we will see benefits from that program in not too distant future, where we would have a number of persons who have completed with first degrees in nursing who will be able to support our health sector. And we're very thankful for SGU for that intervention, that we can have a number of persons trained there. Through the Ministry of Health, again, we have had a number of nursing assistants that were supported and trained through the TMR Community College. And we just had graduation from TAMCC not too long ago, where a number of persons were trained and are not certified as nursing assistants that can support the health sector. But there is still need for more. And I just want to assure you that we have been in discussions with various sectors to support more persons, especially with areas of specialization.
Thank you very much, PS. There's a caller on the line. Caller, you're live.
Good morning.
Yes.
Something I want to find out. In the last government, we had kids that went away on scholarship and they had to return because that government didn't pay the tuition fee. Now, the question is, did this government pay that tuition fee, that backlog, so that these kids could have gone back to school?
Is it possible you could be a bit specific, sir?
Yeah.
Caller? P.S. I'm not sure if it's a conversation that you're acquainted with.
I'm not sure I can connect the situation that the caller is speaking about. But just to indicate, Cadore, that our scholarship recipients receive financial aid from both government of Grenada as well as a friendly government that they are going off to study in. And in some instances, they are well taken care of financially in terms of the support. I haven't had a case where there is any friendly government who has not met their commitment to tuition. I know that the caller referenced the previous administration, but I can't quite tell which country he was referring to or what particular program he was referring to. But we have not had a case where friendly governments have not met their commitment, whether it's the payment of tuition or whether it is the payment of stipend, which facilitates or supports the students' accommodation, meals, etc. We have not had any instances where there have not been any payment from the friendly government. So they do receive support from local government here in Grenada as well as from the friendly governments as well.
Thank you. There's a caller live on the line. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, Ricardo.
Yes, go ahead, please, sir.
Yeah, and morning to Norman. But I tuned in a little bit late. But Norman, are you still the permanent secretary acting with responsibility for human resource development, religious affairs and information? Are you still acting? Your full yes. That's one. And then I want to touch on Mr. Rolo, the caller that called talking about past participles, and I think that Rolo does stop a bit. Because the young man is there talking properly, using the right words, but you won't get everything right sometimes. And I think that he's exaggerating a bit, Rolo. Yeah. I want to touch on I heard Mr. Norman mention about finance, about the GPA. He was saying that you need to have a GPA of 3.245 and 6. But I would like to know, if someone is having problem with finances, in order to get to that GPA, wouldn't they look into that as well? Because remember, if you're having financial difficulties in paying your term, which is about $3,000-4,000 every term down there, even though you get the 10%, that's what it comes up to. Because as a Grenadian investor, you get 90%, and you have 10% to pay, and this comes up to $3,000-4,000 a term for 4-5 courses, based on how much you do. Wouldn't the financial difficulty you're going through affect your term? And wouldn't they look into that in terms of the GPA?
Okay.
I heard you also mention about the politics in choosing students. I think that the politicians do play a role in choosing certain students there as well. The committee, when you look at the committee, Ms. Anne Antoine was a part of the government. She was also an educator. Mr. Ashby is there as well. But I think there is some influence. I might be wrong there, but I think so.
Okay, sir.
That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
P.S.?
Yeah, if I should respond to the caller. And of course, people have varying opinions in terms of the political influence that may be perceived to be part of the committee. I again want to reassure the caller that from my interaction with the committee, I can say that we have been quite on board, quite above board with the work that takes place. Sister Anne David Antoine, Sister Anne-Marie Marshall, Sister Clara Bola, Mr. Colin Dow, Dr. Donald, Mr. George Phillip, Sister Gertrude Niles, Naomi Jeremiah from the Public Service Commission, Victor Ashby, Ms. Shelley Ann Lewis. I believe all are persons who have been involved in education. They have been very above board in terms of their decision making. And I want to reassure the public again that they have been excellent in terms of the recommendations that they have been able to put forward. Now, I know the concern that was raised in regard to the caller's question about the GPA. Whilst having a 3.0 GPA is a standard requirement, there are obviously other factors for consideration in determining the persons who would be awarded a scholarship. And the GPA is not the only determining factor. In fact, the economic need of the applicant is another important factor that has to be considered. And the economic need is based on the person's inability to meet the financial requirement of the learning institution. And so we obviously also have to give consideration to the person's economic situation and the social situation that they are facing, and what are the circumstances that may hinder them from being able to progress and to move forward. So all of these factors are also given consideration. I mean, time doesn't allow me to go into details in terms of the actual criteria and to be able to dissect each criteria appropriately. But I want to say that we have an established criteria. The GPA is one of the criteria, but of course the social and economic need is a very important criteria as well that we also have to factor in when it comes to determining who actually receives a scholarship award. And the other question whether or not it's acting, I want to confirm yes, Permanent Secretary acting within the Ministry of Education, Human Resource Development and Information.
Thank you, PS. From one of our online contributors, they were responding to the question that of financial assistance and exactly how far does government responsibility goes, how far does in terms of what the students would receive. If we can, because I'm assuming that each scholarship, it comes with, there's specific criteria to it in terms of whether or not it's a full scholarship, partial scholarship, and in terms of how the financial responsibility, how it is spread, whether or not it's on the student, the parent, the family, or if it's covered in full by the state or the institution.
Let me respond there, because as you rightfully said, the scholarship may vary in terms of its total value. And vary here means that there are full scholarships, there are partial scholarships awarded, and there's something that the government has invested in a number of years ago called the Economic Costs Award. And that is for students who have interest in furthering their studies at the UWI campuses, around the physical campuses, that is. And so government provide that tuition support for these recipients. But the scholarship award varies in terms of its value based on whether it's full, partial, or scholarship. Now, parents obviously have a commitment, or recipients also have a commitment to provide whatever support it can. Remember I said earlier that government also supplies or provides a stipend. The friendly government also supplies a stipend. Now, if there are any needs that the student would have that has to be accommodated, we also expect that parents, guardians would also be able to provide whatever support. Of course, government cannot do it all. And in many instances, government provide a stipend that we believe is sufficient to be able to sustain the students while abroad. In fact, we provide stipends every year for students, a yearly stipend. Based on where they are, which country they are, the stipends may vary in terms of numerical value. But government has given a commitment to provide a stipend, and we expect that parents, guardians would also provide some assistance as well to support the students while they're abroad, because we understand that despite you may have your basic needs that government would cover, there may be some needs from time to time that students may require that we expect parents to support. And so we expect that guardians would give whatever assistance they can to ensure that the students can, successfully be able to support themselves while they are studying.
8 minutes on to the hour, PS. We almost out of time. We did highlight that we started the conversation by saying that the scholarships that are made available is hinged on government's developmental agenda. What sort of focus in terms of interest, in terms of where we seek scholarship opportunities, what sort of focus is made on what is now the emerging orange economy?
Yeah, in fact, we did have a conversation not too long ago about the creative industry. We also spoke about the oil and gas industry, because that's something that we obviously had interest in. And I'm saying that because a number of persons who want to pursue engineering areas would have to look at what the economic trend is. I can assure you that there are a number of applicants who have expressed interest in the green and climate change areas. We see a number of persons who have also expressed interest in terms of alternative energy, solar energy and other means of energy that can support the replacement of oil and gas. And there are some emerging areas in culture and creative arts that we obviously have a number of interest in as well. I think we just need to ensure that we can support the applicants who have this area of interest. What we have difficulty with in many instances is finding the appropriate university that can support the students based on their needs and based on the available scholarship that government has. Now, there are a number of students, and let me use this example, Cadore. There are a number of students who have interest. For example, a gentleman came having interest in music production. Music and song production, because he believes that that is a need based on where he sees the creative industry going. Now, whilst there is a need for that kind of support, do we have a university that can provide that kind of training? Yes, there are many universities that does music and song production across the world. The question is, do the government of Grenada have relations with these countries that are willing to provide that kind of assistance to students who are willing to study these areas? And I think that's where we need to have greater conversation as government with our friendly governments to explore other opportunities, other areas that can benefit our people in these industries that we do not currently have these arrangements with, that we have to look to expand. So there has been a trust to look at the emerging areas. We just need to ensure that we can support the students who have the interest in these areas. I want to also indicate that the universities in the region, University of the West Indies, have a number of areas that we probably have not adequately explored. That some students have their own predisposed preferences as to where they would go off to study. Now, there are a number of opportunities available in some countries that provide scholarship. If you look at China, for example, under the CSC scholarship, there are a number of areas that are never really explored by our students. And so we need to also expose our students to maybe more career guidance opportunities so that they can now see that, it's not just locked into the accounting, the business, that there are other areas that they can so explore. And so the guidance that we need to provide to our students through the secondary and tertiary level is important so that they can see that these areas also exist and can contribute to national and economic development. And so once we're able to do that, then we can, safely say that we are providing the best possible opportunity for persons to match the economic needs of our country.
You probably have time just for one. We can probably squeeze in one final caller. Good morning, caller. You're live. Hello, caller. We seem to have lost that caller. 3 minutes until the hour. Certainly, I'm going to give you PS a minute or so just to encapsulate our conversation this morning on your position as it relates to scholarships availabilities being made available through the Ministry of Education.
Yes, thank you again. I just want to encourage all the persons out there who are seeking opportunities for scholarship that the Ministry of Education obviously has a number of avenues to which we provide that opportunity. I want to encourage you to visit the Ministry of Education, Human Resource Development for information in regards to scholarships. There are a number of calls that are obviously given out for scholarship. In fact, some calls are later than others, and we don't have control over the timelines based on the friendly governments that may be providing these scholarships. You can tune into the GIS information page as well. All of our scholarships are also announced there at the GIS and on the Ministry of Education's Facebook page in terms of availability. And you can also call the desk and come in. You can call the desk. We are able to provide you with the information that is required. And we want to assure you that your information will be treated with greatest regard. We are very transparent in terms of our process, and we want to support all applicants as much as possible so that they are able to advance themselves. We have a commitment to ensure that we produce quality workforce, quality individuals who can support and substantiate the economic desires and economic needs of this country. But of course, the human development is important, and a critical part of that development process is ensuring that our people are equipped, or they are educated and prepared to make use of the opportunities that would arise, and that we would not have to be importing skill and importing labor to provide for this opportunity that would be existing locally. That we want to ensure that our nationals are educated enough to be able to find the jobs and to be able to produce to support the country's economic development. So I want to thank you for having me again, Cadore. It's been a pleasure, and we can always reach out from time to time to ensure that we provide the public with more information in regard to scholarship, but also that we're available at any time for calls or emails to the scholarship desk for more support and clarity to the Grenadian public, which we have a responsibility to serve.
Thank you, Mr. PS, Acting PS in the Ministry of Education. All the best to you, and allow me to send you advance holiday greetings to yourself and your family.
Yes, thanks to you as well, and same to you and the entire GBN family.
Thank you. 2 minutes on to the hour of 10 o'clock in the morning time. It is Classic 105.5, 105.9. We want to say thanks for being part of that journey that started at 6 this morning. Indeed, it's always a pleasure being here with you. I say also thank you to all of our contributors that has been part of this process online. Indeed, it's a pleasure being here with you. This is as far as I can take you journey's end as we transition into programming for the rest of the day. Tis the Season comes up next right here on GBN Television. Until then, so long everybody. JC loves you. Have a great one.